Hey, what's up you guys? Welcome to my channel. My name is Kylie if you're new, and today, yes indeed, I will be reviewing Child's Play 3. This movie came out in 1991. It received a 29% on Rotten Tomatoes, and here's the synopsis. It's been years since Chucky the doll with the soul and the voice of a psychopathic killer was apparently destroyed in a fire at a doll factory. Now Chucky's manufacturer is remaking the same line of toys with the old, still haunted materials. This resurrects Chucky, who goes after Andy, his former owner, who now attends military school. Chucky slashes his way through a string of grotesque murders as Andy tries to stop the homicidal doll and the spirit within it. So if you're new, I do get into some fun facts first, then I do a spoiler-free review, and then I get into my spoiler-filled breakdown section. So to kick it off with my fun facts, this was actually the first movie in the series to use computers to puppet Freddy. Freddy? Chucky, I meant Chucky. So anyways, with Chucky, they did this with computers to perfect the lip syncing. Apparently under pressure from Universal Studios, Don Mancini was pressured into writing the script for this movie before Child's Play 2 was even released. So this movie came out just a very short 9 months after Child's Play 2. Mancini has called this film his least favorite because he says that he was fresh out of ideas after Child's Play 2. It was just much too soon for him to be Amazon. Brad Dourif has also said this is his least favorite movie in the franchise as well. Also, when this movie was released in Britain, it was sort of the center of a big discussion on a paper called The Sun. There was an article that even demanded that copies be burned because journalists claimed that this film had influenced two young boys to murder a younger child who was a 2-year-old named James Bulger, although it was later determined that neither of the boys had actually even seen this film. It is sometimes claimed that this movie was banned in the UK following this incident, but that's actually not true. However, because of the widespread revulsion of this case and the link that people thought that it had to this movie, most major movie retailers pulled this title from their shelves. This film was very rare to find in the UK until it was released on DVD in 2000, almost 9 years later. This movie also had somewhat of a box office disappointment. I believe the budget for this movie was about $13 million and it only made around $20 million in the box office. This is the reason why there wasn't another Chucky movie until 7 years later with The Bride of Chucky. It's the only film of the series where Andy Barclay is not played by Alex Vincent, however pictures of Alex Vincent do show up in photographs in the movie. This is the last film to use the term Child's Play in its title. Don Mancini also initially wanted to use the concept of multiple Chuckies in this movie, but because of budget constraints they couldn't do that. But they did end up using this idea 26 years later in Cult of Chucky, which is a movie that I am excited to get to, by the way. This movie was filmed at the Kemper Military School and Junior College, however that school has since been shut down. Okay, this next one has a bit of math, so I need to read off my notes. So the story of this film takes place 8 years following the events of Child's Play 2, but was released only 9 months after part 2. And then the story of this film takes place just 1 month before the events of Bride of Chucky, but that movie came out 7 years later. So a bit of a confusing timeline with this franchise. I do have some more fun facts, but they do contain spoilers, so I'm gonna wait to share those until I get to my spoiler section, but with that being said, I'm gonna move on to my spoiler-free review. I think the movie was fine. I had a good time with it. I didn't love it. I got slightly bored at times, I'm not gonna lie, but overall I think it was fine. It felt pretty apparent to me that this movie was rushed. I mean, all of the events in this movie take place in a matter of 2 days, and a lot of the moments in the movie don't feel that well earned. A lot of it is kind of rushed, like the plot is kind of rushed. It just doesn't feel like a completely natural progression of events. Also in this movie, Kyle doesn't come back. I don't know if they really mentioned what happened to her. I don't think that they did. They just kind of got into some of Andy's backstory when he initially got to the military, and they just kind of said, well, he's been bouncing around from foster home to foster home. I don't think Kyle was mentioned, but she doesn't come back from part 2, and that was such a bummer to me. But Andy does have a love interest in this movie, which is De Silva, and I did really like her. I'm also fine with it because she is yet again another very strong women lead in one of these movies. They have quite a bit of them in this franchise. So a couple of the characters were kind of likable. Most of the characters were not likable, but it was kind of for the purpose of them to die off. And on that topic, there was some pretty heavy social commentary in this film, but I think I'm gonna get into that in my spoiler section. Just having to do with the military and kind of how predatory it is, and just kind of the power trip that people go on when they are in these kind of circumstances. Very interesting, not typically my cup of tea to have so much realism in a horror movie, because it's like, well, we know real life is horrifying, so I don't really need that in my movies and my entertainment. But I'll break that all down during my spoiler section. Overall, I guess I would recommend in this movie. It's not great. I would 100% recommend watching Child's Play 2 over this one any day. It's not really a letdown after part 2. It's still a good movie. I think it just kind of, it looms in the shadow of part 2, especially because it came out 9 months after that one. It's kind of like the rushed, ugly stepson to Child's Play 2. I guess that's the best way I can describe it. And also the social commentary was just kind of a little bit too intense for me because I went into it, I didn't really go into it with any expectations because I knew that after Child's Play 2 they would probably gradually get worse because that's kind of just what happens in franchises. So I went in with pretty minimal expectations. One thing I did not expect at all though was how heavy this movie would make me feel in terms of kind of thematically what they were trying to get across to their audience. So I like it, but I'm not gonna urge you to like rush to go watch this one. It's just, I mean, it's okay, it's fine. Okay, so let's get into my spoiler section. I have a couple of fun facts that involve spoilers, so let's start with those. This is the only Child's Play movie in which no women characters die. It's all men that are the victims. Sergeant Botnick explains that they need their hair cut short to avoid the enemy like grabbing their hair and slitting their throat, and then he dies by getting his throat slit. And finally, Chucky always loses his right hand before he dies. I don't know if that's true, like continuing on with the series, but in the first 3 movies, that is true. In Child's Play, Andy's mom shoots it off. In Child's Play 2, Chucky tears it off himself to escape. And in this movie, Andy cuts it off with a knife. I actually only had a couple of spoiler fun facts for this one, so let's just move into my breakdown of the plot. I kind of just get into my thoughts kind of as the movie progresses. I just kind of talk about the order of events. So let's discuss that opening scene for a second, then I'll talk about the first death. So I'm pretty sure that what happened, at least my interpretation, is that Chucky's blood obviously dripped into the molten wax, and then so his essence was then transferred into the next doll that was made. For me though, the timeline of that was a little bit tricky. So did it get cleaned up immediately after it happened and then his blood just chilled in that vat of wax for 8 years? Or was he stuck to the ground for 8 years and then they cleaned it up and then his blood went into the thing and then that happened? I'm just a little bit confused because if the cleanup did happen 8 years later, which I think it did, his blood, I guess, didn't coagulate at all because it still ran a deep red when they picked up his chunk of molten body. So I guess I just want to know where his essence was chilling. I just want to understand that a little bit better because I'm fully willing to suspend my disbelief for that. It's just the timeline was a little bit confusing for me. So maybe one of you guys can clarify that for me, but I am gonna move on to the first death scene because I liked this one a lot. We got to see this money-hungry, soulless, old white dude CEO meet his maker, and it was a really fun scene. I thought it was such a clever opening to have Chucky setting off all these different toys on this old guy to kill him. And really the only reason I wanted to bring up this scene is because it reminds me so much of the end of Toy Story when all of Sid's toys come to life around him. You know what I'm talking about? I cannot help but draw the conclusion that Toy Story was very much inspired by that particular scene. If anyone knows that for certain or like knows anything about that, definitely comment that down below. Anyways, moving on with the plot. Now we are in a military academy with Andy. Honestly, military academies and anything having to do with war, it's my least favorite type of a story. To be very frank, I actually hate war stories. The only one that I can tolerate is 1917 because that was admittedly an incredibly well-made film, but also it's mainly because of how attracted I am to George Mackay. I'd probably watch him in anything, honestly, so he made the movie worth it for me. And typically anything having to do with war, so even a military academy, you can count me out. But because of the social commentary of this film, I was willing to excuse it, and I actually kind of appreciated the setting. On that note, let's maybe discuss some of the other people that died. Most of the deaths were pretty earned. They were kind of the typical power-hungry military leaders and whatnot that died. But one of them was Andy's bunkmate, who I unfortunately cannot remember the name of. And his death wasn't really earned in the slightest because that kind of played into the themes about the US military that this movie was getting into, which I keep kind of dancing around it. But the theme of this movie was basically, it was very in-your-face anti-military, which was kind of a bold choice, but I have to applaud them for it. It definitely exposed what can happen when there are people that crave power and crave being in powerful positions, and then what can play out when these people are placed in said positions of power. Because the goal with these military academies, even in real life, is to strip people of their individualism, both emotionally and literally. For example, in the movie, they just mercilessly remove everybody's hair. They all have to wear a uniform and stand in line, and if they step out of line, there is physical punishment. So you have to do push-ups, or everyone is woken up in the middle of the night to go march outside in the cold. It's essentially a brainwashing process, and I just think it was really bold of them to depict it so accurately in the movie. And I think it was particularly impactful because these things were happening to teenagers, especially with Andy's bunkmate, because his death was so tragic and needless, and it's so ironic that I can't remember his name. But he was literally just a kid, just a teenager that jumped on a grenade. And that happens in the world. It's what happens when we ship 18-year-olds off to be in the military. And it's often because these kids can't afford to go to college, they can't afford healthcare, and so the extremely predatory US military is like, hey, we'll give this stuff to you, just come and fight in our wars for us. So it was kind of just blowing my mind that a horror movie, a slasher horror movie, was getting in so deep with this theme. Because it was a movie that could have so easily relied on cheesy fun and tropey plot lines, but it didn't. It was like, no, we are gonna make intense anti-military commentary. So that's that. I mean, I can applaud it. I think it was a job well done in thematically what they were trying to achieve. However, that's not really something that I want to see in my slasher movies. There's absolutely a place for social commentary. I think especially in horror. If no one else has taught us that, it's Jordan Peele. But I guess with slashers, I expect to go in having more fun rather than being confronted by these very real issues. Because with this scene of this actual teen boy jumping on a grenade, I cannot help but think about how many times this must have happened in real life where a young boy went off and died fighting in a war for somebody else. Basically what I'm saying is that's not the type of horror I guess I personally want to see in slashers, because slashers are typically very fun and provide a good deal of escapism. Anyways, so oh my god, I don't want to talk about that anymore. I hope I never talk about that again. So definitely time to switch topics. I want to talk about sort of the rushed nature of this movie, how it seemed kind of just a tad sloppily thrown together. For one thing, I was surprised that the theme park was brought into the movie so late. They brought it in basically at the beginning of the third act, I want to say. And this made sense in the world that we were in of the movie because, like I said, all the events of this movie happened in just 2 days. But because we're watching the movie, right, and now we're in the third act and this is when they just now bring it in, it's kind of just, okay, so obviously what you're telling me is obviously the climax of this movie is going to happen at the theme park. I just pronounced climax wrong. I just forget that. What I wish would have happened is for Da Silva to have kind of snatched him away, maybe after she gave him that cute little gun lesson, which, by the way, on that note, I love that scene where the girl is showing the guy how to do something and coming up behind him, because it's such a cliche moment, but they made it unique enough with the kind of gender role reversal that I really liked it. So I wish that she had snatched him after that and then kind of shown him around in the beginning of the movie, and we kind of established our setting, we established there was a theme park, so then that way it would have given us time to forget about the theme park, but then when it would get brought back in later, we'd be like, oh yeah, and then it would click. So on that note, let's talk about the ending of this movie. I felt that in a way they were trying to outdo themselves yet again by this time having the climax obviously at the theme park. I do have to admit, I think that there was room for them to outdo themselves having the showdown in this roller coaster room instead of the doll factory, especially because they ended up in that ride that was the Devil's Lair. I did think that was really cool. I just don't quite think that the action of the ending really didn't really do it for me. It wasn't super exciting, honestly. What I did like though was this added element in this movie of the character of Tyler, because yet again we have a child and the stakes are just a lot higher when we have a child that's being manipulated by Chucky. And also, admittedly, I was kind of done with Andy at this point. I didn't think that Andy needed a third movie, so I'm glad that Chucky's focus and the plot of the movie was kind of more focused on saving this Tyler child now, and with that there was less plot recycling going on with this movie. I did love some of the moments that we had at this theme park and in the roller coaster ride. Some moments were pretty cool, and on that note, I do wish that amusement parks were used more frequently in horror. There's so much room to work with there. I think of Final Destination 3, excellent, excellent film. As well as, I guess Zombieland would count, but that's used pretty briefly. What I would like is an entire movie. I want the whole horror movie set at an amusement park, so if that exists, please let me know. Anyways, so the ending is fun in that setting. There are some moments that drag just a little bit because there's not a ton of action, not a ton of fighting going on. One moment though that I did really like is, I think we can all agree here, the moment when Chucky's face gets sliced off by that big Grim Reaper thing. Very cool, very disgusting. And then in the ending, right before Andy slices off his hand, we have another reach for it moment. Tyler's trying desperately to give Andy his knife and he's trying to reach for it and he can't. It's just, I mean, it's okay. They only used it one time in this movie, so it's fine. It's just, man, like, you used that 3 times in the last movie. It's funny. It's just funny. And I can definitely see like how Mancini felt that his idea well had somewhat dried up at this point. And then the way that Chucky fell into the fan, it was again very over the top, very fun. I thought that was a pretty decent death for him. And then I guess yet again we had that psych moment because he got shot and then he jumped back up on Andy's back. I forgot about that. But I guess that's just Chucky's thing. You think he's dead and then he's not, and then you think he's dead again and then he's not. So yeah, honestly, not a ton of topics to get into with this one. But I do think that this movie is rewatchable, especially in terms of having a Child's Play marathon. This is still a good movie. It definitely and unfortunately does not even hold a candle to part 2. And I just want to touch on this again, that I missed Kyle. I wish she was there. Again, Brad Dourif, obviously very talented. He delivered some fun lines. None of them, I think, really captured the same amount of wit that they did in part 2. It's also very hard for me not to compare this movie to part 2. Decent death scenes. I do think, one thing I will say is the blood weirdly looked a little bit more fake in this movie than it has in the previous movies somehow, but good death scenes nonetheless. Some fun action. I did enjoy the ending, even if parts dragged a little bit for me. Overall, this movie is fun. I think it's worth the watch, but again, I'm not gonna rush you and urge you to see it. Also, sorry if today's review was a little bit lame. I'm a little bit tired today. My finals are coming up. I'm not feeling totally on my game right now. You know what I mean? So sorry if today was not the most enthused review that I've given. I am aware of this and I do try to film on days when I have the most energy. Today I had to film today because I leave to go home tomorrow, which by the way, if you are traveling tonight to go see your family tomorrow, I really, really hope that you got tested. I got tested a couple of days ago to make sure that I was negative before going home to see my family. They're urging people not to go home, but if you do, please get tested. I mean, at this point today, I guess it's a little bit too late because Thanksgiving is literally tomorrow. But other than that, I hope you get to eat some amazing, delicious food. I hope you have a great time with your families or just by yourself or with your partner, whatever your circumstances might be. I hope that you enjoy your day tomorrow. Also, because of the holiday that is happening tomorrow, I have featured some Indigenous organizations down below that you can donate to. Very important to remember the origins of this holiday and to support our fellow Indigenous peoples. So be sure to check out all those sources, those petitions and everything down below. I update those every single week. If you'd like to follow me on social media, basically all of my handles, my Depop, Instagram, Twitter, Letterboxd, TikTok, that is all at Kai Johns. And those will all be linked down below. Really easy peasy for you to find me. On Friday, I will be announcing the giveaway winner. And so far, I think that only one person has actually guessed the correct movies that I'm giving away. But good luck to you all. I hope that you enjoyed this video and I hope I catch you in the next one. Bye!